Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hey, I'm so happy to be here. I had a great evening last night where I got to, for just a moment, share a quick story about Molly Kruzman, which I'm going to do because I'm here, because she made that possible. So years ago, I spoke at a conference on women in philanthropy, and Molly came up to me right afterwards and said, "Oh, I'd like to bring you to Bend, Oregon, where I live. And I thought we could just have a little living room conversation with a group of my friends talking about women's giving and women giving back." And I said, "Great." And I gave her my card and we had a phone call and she said, "What kind of topics could we cover?" So she and I discussed it and she said, "Okay, that sounds great. You know what, I'm gonna see if I'll gather a few women together and I'll give you a call back." Fast forward just a couple months later, she called me and said, "Well, I've rented out the Tower Theater. We've sold 500 tickets. Your name's on the marquee and everybody's waiting for you to come. Does that date work for you?" So Molly Kruzman does nothing small. And she and I work together on so many different projects, and one of them is my privilege to be able to help her on a documentary she's producing now called 5 Women, 4 Seasons, and 4 of the 5 women are here today. So shout out to these great women who are living for a year, right? Clap for them, yes. What thanks, ladies? Who are living in your wilderness here for a year, employing primitive living skills and working together for an entire year of their lives to see what young women are capable of when we remove technology and all of the distractions that can help you from becoming the person you are. So I'm so pleased that they're here and I'm so happy to be here. And I was thinking this morning, I did this keynote a few years ago for Bloomberg in New York. Do you all know Bloomberg? And it was their corporate philanthropy day. And they invited their employees to come and listen to me talk about the ways they can make a difference, not through Bloomberg, but in their own lives. And there was about 1,000 people, and I get there, and the person whose job it is to introduce me has not arrived yet. And I'm seeing the room fill up with 1,000 people, and this man comes running in at the last minute, and he's a journalist, and he's got all the pens in his pocket. He has a notepad that he's flipping through frantically, and he said, "Oh my goodness, I haven't had a chance to read your bio, but don't worry, I'll just wing it." And I said, "That's great, because that's always worked out, when people just wing it. That's an excellent move." So I'm sitting in the front row, and it's kind of auditorium style. And he gets up there and he's doing that thing that people who read quickly do, which he's kind of flying through it and paraphrasing. And he says, "We have with us today an international expert on philanthropy." And I kid you not, I am sitting there and I look over my head and think, "Oh, someone's speaking before me? Oh, great." And then I thought, "Oh, shoot, that's me. I'm the international expert on philanthropy." And I'm sitting there thinking, how is this possible? That it's me? And how can it possibly be? And I have to say that in the same breath I thought, it actually makes perfect sense. I was raised in the oldest mill town in the United States. And I was raised at a time during the 70s where there was an interesting shift happening in this country, which was we were slowly starting to move away from democracy as your identity as an American and moving a little closer to consumerism as your identity and starting to mistake the two. As though if you had purchasing power, this is what made you a great American, not if you voted or if you volunteered or if you gave back. And we, as my family did not have money, my father died of an inoperable brain tumor when I was a child. My mother is not from the United States and did not speak fluent English, and she had my sisters and I on her own with a high school diploma. And growing up at a time where you were valued for the things you could buy and the resources you had, and to not have any of that, and to go to food banks and get food stamps and be on welfare, you weren't really seen as a great American. And my family and I, we did a lot. I remember my mother saying to me, even though we don't have much, there are people who have less and we have to help them. And I was raised under that ethic. But it was tough to see myself as someone who could be a great change agent in the world, because the people around me did not see me that way and did not talk to me that way. And I grew up kind of holding two things. I held both a sense of how do people not see that my family and I have a lot to offer? And at the same time, I carried and held a lot of shame. I was so worried that my economic world would hold me back. And I'm so grateful for scholarships and social safety nets, which I hear them being criticized a lot these days, criticizing people for needing a safety net and needing help. I don't know where my mother and my sisters and I would be today if there hadn't been a safety net for us, and if people had blamed us and punished us for falling on hard times. And I think it's an enormous gift to have compassion for people and just be there for them without judgment. You do never really know how someone got where they were and what happened. And the greatest gift, I think, is to say, I have your back on this. And I was able to go to college because of scholarships, and my sisters and I were the first in our family to go to college. So all of that assistance, which is when you support WiLL and these groups that I had a chance to visit with, it makes it possible for people to have the life that they know they can have. But I carried this shame with me for a bit, and can I tell you, a big part of what I tried to do was I just tried to hide it. And so as I got into college, and I realized people had read books that I had never read, and they had gone to camps, and there are all these things people had done that I thought, oh shoot, I don't write, and so I just didn't reveal that much. I didn't talk about it, I was quiet, I did well. And I did a lot of stuff about watching how middle class and upper middle class people functioned to try and mimic their behaviors. I tried to figure out how do you pass as a middle class person. And I changed the accent that I had. Now my mother's from Finland, so I look a bit Scandinavian and European, and people think if you have a certain cheekbone level, that means you were never poor. So, right. It's just true. So I could look like a certain way, in a way that I felt like, okay, I'm passing. And so I just did this. I did this and did this. And I'm a relatively well-read, smart person, so all of that is just getting packaged nicely. But I walked around feeling like an incredible imposter. And a lot of terror and fear that I was going to be found out. And when I was found out, I would be kicked out. And it turns out you can't actually run from something too long. You can hide it, you can cover it, you can mask it, but it will always find you. And it found me, and I found my place in this world of philanthropy by dealing with money. And I started fundraising because one day someone's like, we really need someone to raise some money for this. I mean, would anybody be willing to do that? And I did this. Well, I mean, I'll do it. I mean, how hard can it be? Oh, really? Nobody stopped me. Not a single. Kathy'll do it. Great. That's some nice friends. And I have to tell you, I was really comfortable with letter writing and grant proposals and direct mail appeals and drives that, auctions and all of that. And I loved it, and it was great. But then as I got better and better at it, people started saying to me, you should do major gifts fundraising. And I, sure, okay. I'm not sure I really knew what that meant. And I'll never forget the first time I went on a major gifts meeting, and I went with this man named Christopher, and we were raising money for an HIV/AIDS organization. And he said, just follow my lead. And so we go into this really nice restaurant, and they're just chatting. There's just a lot of social banter and about whose kids and what schools people apply to, and I'm just kind of sitting there quietly. And then, just like magically, that portion of the conversation stopped. And then it went, well, tell me what you're here for. And Christopher, I was with, just talked about this group endlessly. And this guy really said nothing. And then he asked him for a certain dollar amount, and he left him a packet of stuff. And he said, okay, well, I'll be in touch. And we all shook hands and left. And I looked at him and said, can I ask you a question? was that a good meeting? Did we just have a good meeting? He said, well, he didn't say no. And I looked at myself, but you know, I don't know anything more about him than I did before we came in. He knows an awful lot about what we're doing, but why does he care about this cause? And why did he want to meet with us? And why would this dollar amount be right for his philanthropy and his purpose? And he said, no, Kathy, that's not the way that we do it. And I said, huh. So we don't find anything out about another human being. That's going to go really well. So I did that for a little bit, and my goodness, I hated it. It felt inauthentic and disingenuous, and it all felt like I was supposed to function in a polite society that I didn't fully understand. I'll never forget sitting across by myself first time with a woman, and she said to me, Kathy, where does your family summer? This is my first thought, right? I was like, summer's a verb? I thought it was a noun. And I thought, do I say, well, my backyard. Pool from Kmart, that's nice, we enjoy that. She starts talking about the Hamptons, and this was going on, and I thought, my goodness. And then there was a day where it all came to me, and it was that great defining moment. One of the things that my mother always said to me is, watch closely for defining moments, because they come quietly. And how you respond to them will not only create your future, but it's a reflection of your character. And so I was doing some work for women's human rights, and my friend Sue said, you've got to meet my friend Linda. You have to meet her. She's going to love this work. She's going to get behind it. She'll write you a check. She'll be a part of it. I say, great. I call, Linda has a gatekeeper. I make an appointment. She says, all right, we'll have breakfast. And then she said, and you can have breakfast at the Four Seasons. And that's in New York, and that's insanity. And I almost said, can it be at Denny's? Is there that word? That's a good special there, but no, it's fine. And I remember I get to the Four Seasons, oh my goodness, I'm sweating at this point. And I'm early, and I open up the menu, and I look in bagels for $14. Plain bagels, there's nothing on them. And I thought, it's fine. I'm just gonna eat later, it'll be fine. And this woman comes in, and she's looking around as though she's looking for someone, and I think, oh, no, that can't be my appointment. This is for a women's human rights group. And she walks right over to me, and there's a lot of hair, just a lot. And there's more makeup than hair, and a full-length mink coat, and stilettos like this. Inches and inches of stiletto. And she walks right over to me, and she said, you must be Kathy, I'm Linda. I'm so sorry that I'm late. And I said, no, it's okay. And we jump up, and the busboy comes over, and he says, Miss Linda, we have your table ready for you. She has her own table at the Four Seasons. Like, I'm now thinking, I hate Sue. Sue is a bad person. And you know what I'm thinking the whole time? I don't understand why she sent me. Isn't there a person who's better for her, and why would I be doing this? And we start walking over to the table, and I'm following her. I'm kind of a little bit behind her. And without looking, she takes her coat off and extends her arm back and hands it to me. Do you know those moments that just last forever? Time slows down. And I thought, oh, shoot. And you know what it's going on in my head? Take it. Just take the coat. Take it. It's fine. Just take the coat. And then this lifetime, like it's all coming in front of me, all of it, my entire life in this moment. And I look back now, and I understand that what was happening for me is there were two choices. And choice A was, am I fundraising for social change? And choice B, is there a chance to create social change while I'm fundraising? And maybe that was the piece that had been missing in all the ways that I'd been taught to fundraise that felt false to me and disingenuous and not real. And what if we have to have the right conversations to create the right work? What if that's one of the pieces we're missing? And I thought, okay, away we go. And I'll quote my mother often because she's my favorite person on planet Earth, and everything I am that's good is because of her. Any mistakes I made, turns out they're all mine, and it's quite a list. And anything I've ever done in my life worth acknowledging is because of her. And one of the things she said to me is, you do not have your dignity in life if you rob someone else of theirs. So I did this thing in the way that we all know we can do this as women, and I leaned forward and I put my hand on the small of her back and I said, Linda, can I tell you something really important? And she turns and looks at me and says, oh yes. And I said, so I'm a huge animal rights activist, which I am, and can I tell you, it's like 100 minks coming at me. It's like more mink than I've ever seen in my life. And I said, it probably would reduce me to tears to take your coat right now, but how about I find someone to hang up both our coats? And she pauses, and she's completely silent. And she lifts her eyes up, and she's crying. Her eyes are filled with water, and I'm thinking, I'm fired, that's it. Time to get the resume out. And she looks at me and she said, Kathy, do you know why I was late today? And I said, no. And she said, the first thing is that it takes an awful lot of work to look like this. And I have my husband's reputation to uphold. Well, my goodness. You know, John Steinbeck says there are rooms of experience I could never enter. And I had a lifetime of distancing myself from people who had resources, not because there was anything wrong with them, but because I felt small. And I felt I didn't have a voice because I created a world where I didn't have a voice. And it hadn't dawned on me the burdens that her life could have that I would never understand. I don't know anyone whose reputation I could ruin. I'd like to try, because that could be a lot of fun. And then she said, and our friend Sue told me that you were awfully smart about all of this, and I was a little intimidated. I said, you were intimidated? I'm just glad I didn't give you my coat, because it's being held together with duct tape right now. I wish it was, because I love duct tape. And the busboy's like, I'll take your coats, I'll take them both. The poor busboy is part of this the whole time. So we walk over and we sit down, and I say to her, oh my God, how do you walk in those shoes? And she said, oh honey, practice. And she said, about the coat, and I said, I know, it's all right. She said, it's force of habit. And I said, I know. And she said, are you really an animal rights person? And I said, oh God, massive. And she's like, oh no. And we started talking, she looked at me and she's like, so who are you? And I had the packet in my bag, which I never pulled out. And we talked about everything. And I told her the story of my life. I had never told anybody the entire story of my life. And this woman, who I would never have guessed, and I said everything, and she cried, and we listened, and we drank coffee, and then she told me about her life. My goodness, the assumptions we make about people. She had 2 PhDs. 2. I have a bachelor's degree from a state school. She has 2 PhDs. She owns her own literary agency, which her family called her hobby. Hobby. So bright, so smart, interesting, fascinating, heart-driven person. She grew up in a house, she said, where it was her and her mother and her father and 3 brothers, and during dinner conversations about social issues or politics, she and her mother weren't allowed to say a word. They never got to speak. And she said, I guess Sue and I thought you and I should meet so we can make sure that other women and girls don't have to go through the voiceless journey that you and I have both been in. And all of a sudden, the number of zeros she could write on a check versus the number of zeros I could write on a check seemed so silly to even focus on. That we had had different journeys, but really similar experiences as women. And neither of us wanted other women and girls to go through that again. And I got what this work could be if we told the truth, if we told our story. I've since then never worried about what outfit I'm going to wear, or if I say the right thing, or if I don't know an Ivy League school that someone goes to, I say, oh shoot, I don't know that school. What state's that in? I don't have to worry anymore, because I'm not there to do anything except create an opportunity for someone to make a difference in the world. And following this approach, I've raised $150 million from individuals.
Wow.
And what women have said to me, and so I will sit down and say to someone, you know, I have no idea if this organization is going to be a good match for you. I don't know. But there are a couple things that seem to me in my heart and brain that click with who you are. I thought we'd talk about it for an hour and see where we go. If it's not a match, I just made a new friend. And if it is, then we could take a next step. What do you think? And then we just have a conversation about changing the world together. And it's an incredible thing to be able to do. And part of the journey of coming into that, for me, has been witnessing people who live with such courage and people who taught me the most about what it looks like to be in your full humanity. You know, Molly spoke in the beginning about the power of words, and think about the last time you've heard anyone in a public space talk about respecting someone's humanity. Think about the last time you felt people have respected your humanity. I go into a lot of airports. I don't really feel like my humanity is respected in airports, I have to say. But boy, when it happens, you know you're in the presence of it. And there's more opportunities to know we're in our humanity than not. And mine came in 1994. I was living and for 7 years I lived in beautiful Seattle, Washington, so the Pacific Northwest has my heart on so many different levels. And I was walking to work one day, and Seattle has a lot of those outdoor magazine newsstands. And I'm walking past one of these stands, and on the stands are covers of Newsweek and Time magazine. And both magazines have on their covers, Bosnian Muslim women screaming. And I just stopped in my tracks. And I went and bought both of those, and I went to work, and I read them cover to cover. And I have to say, to this day, I'm so grateful to the journalist who broke this story, because there were a lot of people who did not want this story told, and they were very courageous to make it happen. And what I read in these was what was happening in modern day Europe, in a place where the Olympics had been just a decade earlier, that women were being used as a tool of war, and that they were being dragged from their homes and put in rape genocide camps, where they were kept for months, not to be killed, but to be impregnated, so that they would never just have a purely ethnic Muslim child again. When I, even now, saying that out loud to you, I feel like somebody is punching me so hard in the gut that I cannot catch my breath. And I remember sitting there as a 23-year-old reading these magazines going, what? I'm sorry, what's happening in Europe? I was a history major. I remember studying the Holocaust and things like that. And I remember as a younger person doing that thing about, well, why didn't anybody do anything? You know, that question? My goodness, I'm sitting there in my office realizing I understand completely. What could I possibly do? I'm 23 years old. I made $19,000 a year working for an aid service group. You know, my then girlfriend and I had to split meals to be able to make sure we paid all our bills and had, who am I? I don't know anyone important. I don't have any money. What am I gonna do? Like call Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright, because I'm sure they're waiting for my call. They can't wait to call me back. And I just was frozen, and I started to talk to people about it, and they're like, I know it's so awful, Kathy, it's so awful, but there's nothing we can do. We can pray for these women. And I thought, okay, prayer is a piece of it, but I'm not sure it's the whole thing. So my mother had once said to me, when in doubt and you feel most overwhelmed, learn more. Learn everything you can. And I read everything. Why was this happening? Why was it happening now? Why was this happening to women in this way? What was this war really about? And I went to the University of Washington, and I saw speakers, and I asked them questions, and I learned. Turns out you show up enough, things just start presenting. And I met a University of Washington professor who said, I'm going to go to Bosnia in a few months and volunteer in the refugee camps. Do you want to go with me? And I said yes. Do you know one of the things that I remember most about that is I was doing some getting infant formula and yarn. It was winter in Bosnia, and one of the things that women there said they needed was yarn so they could make clothing. It was a war, there was no place to get it. And then infant formula for their children. So I was gathering all of this, and people would say, "This is so great, you're doing this. So is your family Bosnian? Is that why you're going?"
Wow.
Somebody said to me, "So, my goodness, Kathy, the UN can't do anything about this. What do you think you could possibly do?" And then here is a personal favorite. "You're young and you don't know this." Isn't that nice when we patronize young people? Kind of, I was thinking, oh, they're intimidated that I'm taking action, but okay, keep going. And he said to me, "But we don't go, Kathy, during a crisis like this. We go after."
Oh.
And I looked at him and said, "And that has worked out really well thus far. Let's look in the history books. That's been smart." And I finally said to someone, "Oh, I have no idea what to do when I get there. I just know there's probably a million reasons I shouldn't go. But the only reason to go is if it were me, I certainly hope other women would show up. If that were happening to me in my home in Seattle, and women just didn't come, I can't imagine that the despair of that might almost be as bad as what was happening." So I did everything, got it all ready. I had never been on a plane before, P.S. So this was, but I was going with someone, so this would be fine. And then at the last minute, she dropped out, and she couldn't go. And everyone said, "You can't. Do you know what they're doing to women there? You can't." And I said, "I have to." And so I flew to Bosnia in the middle of the war when I was 23. And I remember I got to, I think it was Austria, and there was a flight to Bosnia, and it was Air Croatia. What? How can that even be an airline? Please, if someone even gives you a free ticket, go, "No, I'm good. It's mine. It's mine." And I remember it was me and 6 Serbian businessmen and a little backpack. How's everybody doing? They just stared at me on the plane the whole time, and I thought, oh my goodness. And I landed, and I stayed a few weeks, and as you can well imagine, it completely changed my life and changed the direction my life would take. And there's an interesting thing about it now that a friend and I were recently talking about, because people have asked me what I did there. And I did things like I swept floors of refugee camps and I fed people. I took documents that, there was a group that I volunteered for called the Women's Association of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they would translate things into English, and then I made them grammatically correct to go to the UN and the European Union. And in today's philanthropic world, those would be the things, by the way, people were looking for. What are the specific, tangible things that you did? What were the outcomes? What was... But that's actually not the thing that I did that mattered. It's the thing today that would get funded. The thing I did would never get funded, and it was the most important thing that I did, which is I witnessed people's lives. I had people say to me, "I actually feel like I can go on because you flew out this way for me." People would hug me sobbing, saying, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for not forgetting us." I hired a translator and I listened. I sat across people. I remember sitting across from a man, and he was in this old rickety donated wheelchair, and he had lost both his legs, and he kept trying to recall in which field his legs had been blown off. And he was telling me every detail. And at one point he lifts his shirt up and he's got these knife wounds across him, and they're not healed because there's no doctors. And he's telling me everything, and he looked at me and he said, "The best part about this is you don't have a story to match it." And I got the importance of, if you each have the same trauma and you're kind of one-upping, "Yeah, well, this happened to me, yeah, well, this," and you're never heard. And what it meant for me not to have a story like that and to listen. And what I did is I witnessed people's lives. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't end the war. I couldn't change it. But I could show up and be there. And what it looked like to just show up for people. And when I left, I was, I knew money back home. I had a job. There was like a lot I had to be responsible to. And it was the stress of it was starting because I was there by myself. I didn't have another American to talk to. And when I was getting ready to leave, I learned that the military had taken over the airport because they no longer wanted humanitarian aid to come into the country. So we couldn't fly out that way, anyone trying to leave. So you had to take a train and get to Western Europe on a train. So I'm getting ready to go to the train, and there was this fantastic man who I'll always remember, whose job it was to drive me and the other women everywhere. And he was gigantic. He was a ginormous man, and he always protected us. And he always watched out for us. And he came up to me and said, you know, I knew a little Bosnian, and he said, we're going to the train. And my translator said, Kathy, the founder of this group wants to come to the train with us. And I said, okay. And here's why I froze when she said that. In the 2 weeks that I was there, the woman who was the founder never spoke a word to me. And I was so worried that I was somehow kind of taking up too much space. You know, Americans, we have a way of kind of taking over a little bit. And this was a war about people trying to get other people's land and space. And I didn't want to do that. So I would make everyone Turkish coffee in the morning. I would say good morning. She would nod at me. Love these women. They're the Turkish coffee with the grinds and smoking like crazy. These fierce Eastern European women. But she didn't ever look at me or say anything. And I just always tried to, you know, be as quiet as I could. So we get to the train station. We're on the platform. And I'm really aware that I'm not probably ever going to see these women again, that I would fundraise for them, and I did, but that I might not again see them in person. And it's, you know, a little emotional. And the founder looks at my translator and nods, and my translator said, she wants me to tell you something, and I'm going to translate. And it is now 20 years later, this month actually, that I'm with all of you, that this happened. And this is my best memory of this conversation. She said to me this: we somehow knew the war was coming, but we didn't really want it to be true. I knew for sure when the military knocked down the door of my home, pulled me, my husband, and my 8-year-old son out onto the front lawn, shot my husband and my son to death, started laughing, and walked away. She said, I knew then there was no one to go to, no one to call, no one to get help. And I also knew they were on their way to my neighbor's house, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. She said, the only thing I could do looking at my boy was remember the last thing that he ever made for me. She said, and I went to the house and I opened the box, and she said, Kathy, you don't know this because you're not a mother, but mothers keep boxes of the things that our kids make us. She said, and I opened up the box, and on the top of it was the last thing he had made me, and it was a brooch from his art class. And it was kind of a silver metal wire and different sands and beautiful colors and stones. And she said, and I held it remembering that when he gave it to me, I was rushed that day, and I said, oh, it's so beautiful, I love it, and I put it in the box. And she said, and I'm standing there now, and I'm holding this realizing this is the last thing that my boy will ever make for me. And I'm standing there quietly and listening, and she puts her hand in her jacket pocket and pulls her hand out. She has the pin, and she leans forward and puts it on me. And she said, you are now the child that I lost. I think that I hadn't really witnessed humanity in its most extraordinary state until that moment. Everything that mattered to her had been taken away in the most violent way possible. And her response to it was to lead a group of women to help women and children. And then to be able to give me the very last thing her son made for her. I felt my own humanity so fully in that moment, her courage, her love, her bravery. And I knew that for me, that was the picture of the best of who we are. And I left and I went home, and by the way, I have a box now that brooch is in. It goes with me, it has traveled with me the last 2 decades of my life. When I lose my way or wonder if I can keep going, or are we making enough strides forward, or I open it and I remember, and I know that I will never let her down. And I started to find people to fundraise with, and I found a few other Americans who had actually taught self-defense to women who had survived the camps as a way for these women to get their fighting power back. And we all started raising money. We did a t-shirt campaign, $25 a piece, because I gotta tell you, I went to the big foundations and they said no. We have to wait till the conflict's over. You need to prove to me the return on investment. I need a budget. I'm like, did you just ask me for the return on investment to get trauma therapy for little kids who were in these camps? It's literally, you just asked me for that. And I kind of tossed them to the side, and magazines gave us full-page ads for this t-shirt campaign. And do you know, a couple people made larger gifts, but for the most part, and this is 1995, we raised $250,000 from $25 donations from people throughout the world who would write, "Thank you for giving me a way to help." We then sent 7 of the women who I had met and worked with to testify at the International War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague. And their stories are now a permanent part of the historical record of women in this world and what women have endured in war. $25 at a time. It wasn't the big gun philanthropist who stepped up. George Soros did a ton, by the way, a lot, and he's awesome in so many ways. But all the established foundations said, no way, we're not touching it, because we don't know how to monitor and evaluate. And I thought, have we lost our way so profoundly that we don't know that the smallest gestures are actually the keys to unlocking social change? There's all these awards that I get and really nice things that are said about me, and it's very, very sweet. But here's what I know to be true. The best things I do are the things that nobody sees. They're the small, simple, quiet things that I do that are a reflection of what I'd like this world to be and what I hope my character is. And as women, we can't forget how much that matters, because it has been us that has held up this world. Look at the United States. Who are better seriously than the women who are always volunteering at the voting booths, who are always at the blood drives, who you go into a hospital and they're working the gift shop? This is all civic leadership. These women have not gotten credit, they don't get buildings named after them, and they have held up America. And I have traveled to most countries throughout this world. Guess what? Turns out it's regular local women who are holding up the world. We don't have to worry about, is it going to go to scale? How many more hundreds of people can you reach? What's the replication model? Sometimes that just doesn't work. Sometimes it's the greatest act of small giving and humanity that can transform the way the world works. And I actually, having now been involved in philanthropy for over 20 years, and I am certain of it, that it's you and I doing the small, beautiful, loving, compassionate acts that will in fact change the way this world works. Do not let anybody tell you it has to be monstrous and big, because the beauty lies in that moment on that train station platform that completely changed who I was. And I did not get funding to go on that trip. I raised it myself. And that set in motion the life that I have now. So for you all who do such extraordinary work, and I got to talk to some of the grantees and listen, and one of the beautiful women who runs one of the groups said to me, well, we only got 8 this time, and I said, yeah, 8 lives transformed. That's not a bad thing in this life. And it doesn't have to be 100 for it to matter. One person's life actually matters. And there's no such thing as what's the return on investment. And I learned this recently from my dear friend Evelyn, who runs a group called the Lollipop Theater. And she's so awesome. She went into Universal Studios and got them, signs her life away, and she gets movies that are made for kids before they're released in theaters. She has to carry it on the plane. It can't ever be out of her possession, because think of the amount of money that's going to be generated from like Monsters, Inc. And she gets these movies and can bring them to Children's Hospital. So these kids who are terminal can watch this movie because they will not live long enough for the theatrical release. She went to a children's hospital in Boston recently, showed one of the great kids' movies that came out. There were 4 kids who came. They do this brilliant thing where they put the red stanchion ropes in a red carpet, and all the kids get little tickets that they get torn, and then they sit in their hospital beds and they got the stuffed animals that go along with the movie. And the mother came up to her and said, she had a 7-year-old boy there, and she said, "You just gave my son the one thing I haven't been able to give him that he keeps asking for." Time of his life, this little boy. Evelyn flies back to LA, returns the movie to Universal. 3 days later, she gets a call from the nurse on site who said, so we wanted to let you know he passed away this morning. And for the last 3 days, all he did was talk about the movie. He went to other kids and told them scenes from the movie. It was the most lit up and happy we'd ever seen him. The next day, Evelyn went to lunch with some studio type executive to ask for a donation for the work. She told him the story, and he said, "Well, what does that cost? Like, what kind of price tag is that?" She said, "Well, with airline and the insurance on the movie and all of that, it was about $5,000 to $6,000. And he said, "For 4 kids, I'd want to see a better return on my investment." She called me sobbing. She's like, "What am I supposed to do?" And I said, "Besides punch him in the throat, did you do that?" I would have slugged him. I would have said, "Watch out," and then I would have slugged him. And I said to her, "Right, our job is to make sure we don't ask silly, ridiculous, crazy questions, and we see the humanity in each person that we help. That is what the great work of philanthropy is. Anything else people tell you, dollar amounts, buildings named after people and all of that, that's just detail we put around it. The best is what each of us can do." And when I discovered what I was capable of doing, that had nothing to do with how I grew up or how people saw me, and I unleashed it, and I found my voice, and I was proud of myself, and I'm proud of what I stand for. I will never apologize for the causes that I care about. I will never justify them to another human being. This is my heart and my passion, and I'm going to live it. And I invite your unleashing of your humanity and your voice is be proud of who you are. Be proud of what you stand for, and then stand for it. In the way that best works for who you are in this world, but stand for it. Because that cause needs you so, so much. And around this WiLL Luncheon and this support, how I'll close with you all is there's going to be an awesome woman coming up here inviting you to provide support to this good work. Here's what I want you to think about doing, because it changed when I did this for me. Write the check that really reflects who you are. Write the check that reflects who you are. The first time I wrote a check that had a comma in it, I was like, oh, I might get ill. I don't feel well. I don't feel well. But it reflected what I wanted, the change I wanted to see in the world. It wasn't a limitation check. It was the check that was going to change the way things worked. And that broke open philanthropy for me. And I will leave you with this quote that I love so, so much. And someone sent to me, and there was no one who was attributed to it. So I have to say anonymous because I don't know who wrote it. But it is my favorite. It is, be the kind of woman that when you wake in the morning and you put your feet on the ground, the devil says, oh shoot, she's up. Thank you all so much.